Welcome to today's webinar, Getting from Dollars to Diplomas, brought to you by NCSL. At this time, all lines have been placed on listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to John Cool. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's 2013 NCSL's Top Issues webinar series. My name is John Cool, Public Affairs and Media Manager at the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Each year, NCSL develops a list of the most pressing and important concerns on state legislative agendas. Today we have a panel of NCSL issue experts that will discuss issues relating to higher education. Our experts include Julie Bell, Director of NCSL's Education Program, along with policy specialists Brenda Bausch and Michelle Liu. Today's webinar will include presentations by our panelists, followed by a question and answer period. To submit a question, please use the chat feature on the right-hand corner of your screen. We will try to answer as many of your questions as possible. Thank you again for joining us, and with that, I will turn it over to Julie Bell.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for joining us today. We are very pleased to kick off NCSL's 2013 Top Issues webinar series with the issue of higher education, because this is an issue that has grown significantly over the past few years as a priority area for state legislatures. Funding and budget pressures, changing demographics, changing patterns of student participation in higher education, a concern about the number of students completing higher education, and an increased interest in better leveraging higher education to economic development strategies. All of these pressing concerns have put higher education front and center on state legislative agendas. We have organized our presentation around 5 main themes. First, funding. Second, completion and attainment. Third, productivity. Next, workforce development. And then finally, emerging federal activity in this traditionally state-centered enterprise. Presenting will be NCSL's higher education policy team, including myself, Brenda Bausch, and Michelle Liu. I'll ask Brenda to start by reviewing some trends in higher education funding.
Hi, this is Brenda. So as you can see on the slide, higher education and K-12 education constitute a large portion of general fund spending, almost 50%. We also see other areas of the budget, such as Medicaid and corrections, increasing, which means there are limited funding left over for education as those other categories continue to grow. Sorry, went backwards. With regards to higher education funding, in fiscal year 2012, we saw appropriations pretty much stay level. They went down by 0.4%. This is compared to last year where they went down 7.6%. So overall, this is a good trend that we're seeing. And in fact, 30 states actually did increase their appropriations, ranging from 0.1% to 14%. Taking a 5-year look, going back to the beginning of the recession in 2008, the picture is a bit bleaker. We see that higher ed spending overall is down 38 states. So this is comparing today's spending levels to those in 2008. And over 12 states since then have cut higher ed funding by more than 20%.
And this is Michelle Liu. I just want to talk briefly about tuition prices. As we're starting to see states slowly recover, and in some cases, as Brenda mentioned, be able to increase their higher education funding, we are seeing tuition continuing to rise. And as you can see here, adjusting for inflation, tuition increased over 3% just this last academic year. While increases in tuition often also include increases in student aid, we have started to see total aid actually declining. And again, as you can see from the figures here, it declined by 1.5% in between 2010 and 2011, which is the most recent data we have available. This total aid actually includes all federal and state aid, loans, grants, and tax benefits. So as state legislatures are looking at how to increase affordability for students, These particular trends have led some states to develop initiatives to restrict increases in tuition, such as tuition freezes or locked-in tuition rates.
This is Julie again. So looking at both the trends in state appropriations and the trends in tuition and looking at those together, the decreasing appropriations and rising tuition have some significant impacts, certainly for students and families, but also for states. Simply, decreased state funding has resulted in higher tuition. We are moving away from a public higher education system that is supported mostly by state funding to one that is supported mostly by users through tuition. In this chart, the blue represents the student share tuition, which is going up for all types of colleges. White represents state funding, which is going down for all types of colleges. As this chart shows, over the last 10 years in all sectors, public doctoral, public bachelor's, and public two-year, the state share of institutional revenue has decreased and the student share has increased. Just looking for a moment at public doctoral institutions, that change is from 49%, almost half, from state and local appropriations, to 31%, less than a third 10 years later. And tuition and fees have moved from 25% of institutional revenues to 34% over that 10 years. This change in funding patterns means institutions are moving away from primarily state organizations to more consumer or market-oriented organizations. And many institutions are thinking about how this changes their accountability to the state and how they attract students. This could potentially result in some major changes to the relationship between state and public higher education in the years ahead. We're going to talk next about some of the issues regarding college completion and overall college attainment. Much of the activity in state legislatures in higher education is a result of growing national conversations about very poor college completion rates. Students taking too long to get their degree or not getting it at all, and the need for higher overall attainment rates, education attainment rates within the population in order to meet the needs of the workforce of the future. Brenda is going to start our discussion of completion and attainment issues.
There are numerous benefits to getting a college degree. We know that higher education is strongly linked to economic growth. The wealthiest states have the highest educational attainment. And in today's changing job market, it is ever more essential to have a post-secondary education to be competitive in the workforce. Economists predict that by 2018, 63% of all jobs will require some form of post-secondary education, whether that's a workforce training certificate or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or higher. There are also many social and individual benefits to going to college. College graduates earn higher wages, which leads to higher tax revenues for states and the federal government. People with bachelor's degrees earn on average 60% more over their lifetime than those with only a high school diploma. College graduates also live healthier and longer lives and rely less on state programs such as welfare and Medicaid, saving states a significant amount of money. College graduates participate more in civic activities such as voting and in charitable activities such as donating blood. And children of college graduates are more likely to achieve higher levels of education, so society continues to reap these benefits generation after generation.
President Obama, several foundations, and many other national organizations have set completion goals or attainment goals. For example, the Lumina Foundation's big goal or now referred to as Goal 2025, that goal states that by 2025, 60% of the population will have some form of post-secondary certificate, credential, or degree. Many states are also setting their own goals and using those goals as a framework to design state reform. Nationally, the level of educational attainment among the adult population is around 40%. That means there is a long way to go to reach that goal of 60%. Most states are finding, as they begin to examine their own completion and attainment numbers, that there are significant gaps between those who have been successful obtaining that post-secondary degree and those that have not. This slide shows overall completion beginning with 100 ninth grade students, and of those 100 ninth grade students, you'll see that only 29 will actually complete college. Michelle is going to talk a little bit about some of the gaps in these completion and attainment rates.
So in order to reach these state and national attainment goals that Julie mentioned, these gaps between white and other population groups must be addressed. And as you can see here, there are significant differences between racial and ethnic groups in the percent of adults who currently hold a degree, with Latinos at 19% attainment having the lowest percentage of adults with a degree. So if you go back to the pipeline that Julie showed before, but break it down by race and ethnicity, you can see that all along this pipeline, students of color, here we're highlighting Latino students, are not progressing at the same rate as their white peers. So for every 100 white ninth graders, 27 will ultimately complete a degree, while for every 100 Latino ninth graders, only 13 will complete a degree. The various stop-out points along this pipeline, high school graduation, enrolling in college, and college graduation, are what ultimately lead to the gaps in educational attainment for these population groups. So in order to decrease these gaps, states need to continue to look at ways to improve both access to college and success in completing a degree.
Productivity. Higher education activity in state legislatures in 2012 was very much focused on productivity. That is, how to get more students to graduate, ideally graduate on time, and graduate with a high-quality credential, certificate, or degree. Some of the strategies states are looking at and have looked at to increase productivity include, first of all, very carefully analyzing your own state's completion and attainment gaps, as we discussed. Each state has different patterns and different issues and should take a good hard look at those patterns before figuring out how to target appropriate state policy. Rethinking funding is going on in many states. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. Improving remedial education, decreasing time to degree, easing the transfer process, and targeting student financial aid. Brenda will start our productivity discussion by talking about funding reform.
So traditionally, colleges and universities are funded based on enrollment levels or the number of credit hours that student attempts. So this is measured at the beginning of the semester. States are now rethinking that funding model and looking toward performance or outcome-based models. So this instead links funding to outcomes metrics, and these can include credit completion. So instead of measuring student enrollment at the beginning of semester, states measure the levels of students completing classes at the end of the semester. They also are rewarding states and rewarding colleges for progress metrics, so retention, or the number of students who transfer between community colleges and four-year universities. They are also measuring output, so this is the number of graduates, and they are especially rewarding colleges for graduating low-income students and those who are majoring in STEM fields, or science, technology, engineering, and math. In 2012 alone, we saw 3 states, Michigan, New Mexico, and South Dakota, pass legislation to create new performance funding models. This 50-state map shows state activity across the country. The blue states currently have performance funding models in place. The green states have passed legislation around this topic but have not implemented the model yet, so they're currently working out and designing the formula. The purple states have had formal discussions, and this refers to any type of hearing at a legislature or a convening held by the governor or the Higher Education Coordinating Board on performance funding. A second way that states are working on increasing higher education productivity is through reforming remedial education. Currently, nationally, over 40% of students entering community colleges need remediation. This means that they enter college and they are not ready to take college-level credit-bearing courses. So they were required to take these remedial, also known as developmental courses, to catch up. So students pay for these courses, but they receive no college credit for them. It's estimated that about $2.3 billion are spent on remedial education by states and students. So states in the form of tuition subsidies and students in the form of tuition. So this is costly to both students and states, and it is detrimental to students in terms of their completion. There are higher dropout rates for those students entering remedial education. There are some promising policies, however. States are looking at accelerating remedial education so that students can move faster through those courses and thus get into their real college level courses faster. And states are also looking at just placing remedial students directly into college level courses and then providing those students with extra support such as tutoring and academic advising.
Time to degree. This is Julie. Legislators particularly are very frustrated by the time that it takes some students to move through college and obtain their degree, with every extra year students spend in the system costing the state precious resources. Every extra year that students take to complete a college degree also diminishes the chance that they will graduate. Extra time often means students are taking more credits than they need, costing states more money. A 2006 study by the Florida legislature found that credit hours taken beyond those required to graduate cost the state $62 million each year. States can take several steps to help students graduate on time or even early. Many states have excellent programs for encouraging high school students to earn college credit through programs such as advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and dual enrollment. States and institutions can set caps of 120 credits for bachelor's degrees and 60 credits for an associate degree, or otherwise discourage excess credit hours by removing the state subsidy for students who exceed a certain number of credit hours. Some institutions are experimenting with a 3-year bachelor's degree, which makes use of prior learning credits, a compressed schedule, or course reduction.
Another way states are addressing productivity is through revising their transfer and articulation process. And this is because 1/3 of students will transfer between colleges at least once in their college career. So policies that can ease this transfer process and assure that students don't lose precious time or credits as they move between colleges include creating a transferable general education core curriculum. And this consists of those freshman and sophomore level courses that are the general education courses, and these would transfer as a block between colleges and ensure that students don't lose those credits. Another strategy is through common course numbering, and this is when states have a system in place that takes similar courses at different colleges and gives them a common number. And then students can look at that common number, and again, when they transfer between colleges, know that that course will transfer to another college as that course. Reverse transfer is another policy option, and this refers to awarding students credit for those classes they take at a community college after they transfer to a 4-year school. So say a student starts at a community college, they earn 30 credits, and then they transfer to a 4-year college. They then go on to earn another 30 credits at that 4-year college. Then they can be awarded that associate's degree because they have then fulfilled the requirements for that degree. Transfer pathways is another model, and this refers to when students begin at a certain major at a community college, so they know that they want to major in business administration, for example. They will take a set of courses that have been laid out for them already, and then they transfer to a 4-year university to get their BA in business administration, and those courses they took in the lower level institution are guaranteed to transfer. A last and final policy is called transfer degrees. This also refers to the 2+2 program. So this is when students earn an associate's degree, and then they are guaranteed admission to a 4-year college or university in the state, and guaranteed that they will start at a junior status. So that entire degree and those courses transfer to that 4-year college or university. So these are all a variety of strategies that states have been looking at to help students transfer efficiently and effectively throughout their higher education system.
So looking at state financial aid as a way to increase productivity, just a quick picture of what financial aid dollars looked like in the 2010-2011 academic year. States awarded about $11 billion in total student financial aid that year, which is actually an increase of about 1.3% from the previous academic year. Again, as you can see here, a large portion of this is need-based aid. A smaller portion is what we call non-grant aid, which is traditionally loans and tuition waivers. This portion of state aid has actually gone down about 5% from the previous year. So many states are rethinking their financial aid programs that have been in place for many years in ways that can be modified to have a larger impact on educational attainment rates in the state. One way states can do this is by targeting financial aid to students whose chance of enrolling and succeeding in college will most be improved by the receipt of state support. These can look like early commitment financial aid programs, again targeted to low-income families, even as early as middle school. It also can include incentives for success as well as access. So similar to what Brenda was talking about with performance funding at the institution level, this is for rewarding student success. This can include increased or continued support for credit hour accumulation, or loan forgiveness for on-time completion. And another basic way is to simplify the process and provide transparency on state student aid for students and their families.
Workforce development. During the last few very difficult years, thinking about higher education as an economic development tool has really resonated with state legislators. These discussions are buoyed by the return on investment and by projections mentioned by Brenda about the changing job market, particularly that number of 63% of jobs by 2018 that will require some form of post-secondary education. This is an issue for more traditional students already in the system, but also for adults, returning veterans, and others who have been the more non-traditional students. But Michelle will talk a little bit about this.
So we borrow this term, non-traditional no more, from our friends at WICHE, because we know that these students that were once non-traditional, what were first-generation students, part-time students, commuter students, working students, students with dependents, these students are now the norm on college campuses. Many of the students are also students of color, are over 25 years old, and oftentimes come from low-income households and may be entering college academically underprepared. So as Julie mentioned, some population groups that states are looking at to advance their workforce are Latinos, veterans, and adults. Latinos are, if not already the largest, the fastest growing minority group in every state. In fact, in 3 states, California, New Mexico, and Texas, already have a majority of their K-12 population being Latino. 9 states, primarily in the South, saw their populations more than double in the last census. We are also beginning to see this increase on college campuses, where there was a 24% increase in enrollment for Latinos in 1 year between 2009 and 2010. Many of the strategies that we discussed earlier, particularly improvements in financial aid, transfer options, and reforming remedial education, can be of great benefit to Latino students in particular. And states can support their success by ensuring Latinos have access and are utilizing these programs. Moving on to veterans. As veterans are returning home, many are looking to use their education benefits to complete college. While it is declining, the unemployment rate for veterans who are 18 to 24 years old remains painfully high at 20%. States can support their progress by getting good data on their retention and graduation rates, ensure veterans are immediately able to qualify for in-state tuition, and provide academic credit for their military training and experience. Adults are sometimes called the low-hanging fruit for improving state college attainment rates. With 22% of adults having some college credit but no degree, states are developing strategies to bring these adults back to college and help them to complete a degree. Again, this includes getting better data on who these adults are, how many credits they have, what degree they were pursuing, and what courses are needed to complete. And overall, providing clear and fair evaluation of their past credits to better target getting them back into the system. One of the ways states are doing this are prior learning assessments. So adults need to be able to save time and money to make college a viable option. And so these prior learning assessments are a basic way to provide students with credit for their out-of-classroom experience. And this can be done in a variety of ways. Portfolios, as mentioned before, military training, as well as corporate training, program evaluations, examinations, and some standard examinations that Julie mentioned before, such as AP exams. 23 states already have a policy in place to allow for prior learning assessments, while 13 of these include military experiences in their policy. And a recent study by the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning found that students who received PLA credits were 2.5% more likely to ultimately graduate.
For our last discussion area, we wanted to leave you with some things we are watching very closely at NCSL, specifically regarding a changing role or an emerging role of the federal government in issues of state higher education. At a recent meeting of state legislators and legislative staff with U.S. Department of Education senior staff in Washington, we were told that the administration will look to both early education and higher education as priorities in the next few years. There have been discussions regarding a potential race to the top for higher education. There are several important and national discussions being conducted about potential changes to federal student aid. There are a variety of issues being discussed here, primarily around bringing federal financial aid into the 21st century to better recognize the changing American students, their needs, and their concerns about the large amount of student debt. Second, we know the feds will continue to be interested in greater transparency for both states and institutions in terms of student costs and student outcomes. There have been some discussions about how to hold states and institutions accountable for the level of funding provided and the level of tuition being charged. And at NCSL, we will be keeping our ears open to hear where these discussions might go. Finally, the feds are particularly involved in accountability issues, especially regarding online and for-profit institutions. These issues involve consumer protection issues, authorization, accreditation, and interstate agreements. Michelle is going to talk a little bit more about that.
I just wanted to touch on what was very popular the last couple of years, gainful employment regulations. These link the employability of students to their ability to pay off their student loans. And while the regulations that the Department of Education released were set to go into effect in July of last year, a last-minute federal court ruling prevented that from happening. The ruling states the repayment rate metric that you see there with an asterisk was essentially an arbitrary cutoff point compared to the debt-to-income ratios, which were based on expert studies and industry practices. However, the ruling also affirmed the department's authority to implement regulations defining gainful employment and using this to determine a program's eligibility for federal student aid. The department is still deciding if it will appeal the ruling or issue revised regulations that will meet the court's decision. So it is very likely that we'll see the department again working on metrics that measure the gainful employment of students at for-profit institutions. And there is certainly the thought that the department may in the future extend these type of outcome-based measurements in some way into other public education sectors.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Brenda. That is the end of our presentation. John, we'll turn things back to you for questions and discussion.
Okay, thanks, Julie. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. And just a reminder, you can ask the questions on the right-hand side of your screen in the chat feature. We do have a question already. Here it is. Many are concerned that an emphasis on completion means that the quality of education will suffer in order to reach the completion goals. What are states and institutions doing to measure and ensure quality?
John, this is Julie. I'll take a start at that question, and it's a great one. We hear that from legislators all the time, and it's a really valid question, especially when we're talking about new funding strategies that focus on getting students out of the system. They really begin to wonder, will that be at all costs? Will the institutions just change their standards in order to get students through the system? And those are really good questions. Quality of education in higher ed is something that we're going to be learning more about in the next couple of years. We know very little about it right now. Nobody has really studied it comprehensively. Nobody has really measured it comprehensively, and we just don't know that much about it. One of the activities being overseen by the Lumina Foundation is something relating to what's called degree qualifications profiles. This is an effort to do something that European countries have done, to really analyze and understand and standardize the different profiles, the different courses, the different things that you would need to know in particular degree programs, so that you could begin to have some standard with which institutions could measure and compare to each other, as well as measure how students are doing once they get out of those programs. So this is something definitely to watch and keep your eyes on. Other places are trying to use data more and better, things like satisfaction surveys of students who've been through programs, graduate information that tracks where graduates have been placed and what they're doing, and are they in fields that are related to their field of study, salary information to understand how well paid students are doing in the workforce, and those kinds of indicators to try to understand a little bit more about quality. But again, we do think this is going to be a focus for research over the next few years, and it's definitely something we need. It'll definitely be interesting to watch.
All right, thanks. We did have a quick question about whether or not this will be recorded and if people can listen to it later, and the answer is yes. We should have that up later this week. Our next question, thinking about time to degree, do you have any data that looks at the trends of students enrolled part-time as tuition increases? Are the number of students enrolled part-time increasing?
This is Michelle. I can go back and see if I can find specific numbers of this. What I do know off the top of my head is only 25% of students are enrolled full-time and living on campus. So 75% of students don't fit, again, what we kind of talked about, this tradition, what was thought about this traditional student, the 18-year-old student that graduates high school and moves to a four-year campus. 75% of students are not that student. And a vast majority of those we know are part-time. Again, I'm happy to come back with some more specific numbers if I can find them, but I don't know if Julie or Brenda have any additions as well.
Well, this is Julie. I would just add that in this presentation we really focused on improving time to degree and thinking of that as getting students through quicker or on time. Legislators fully understand that there are many students who cannot do that. There are family issues, there are workforce issues, there are other life issues that enter into their considerations, and that they simply have to take longer to get to the degree. So in no way did we mean to minimize those students or their efforts or their patterns, because those are important, and we need to think about ways to support them too. They're a very important part of this 21st century, kind of the more non-traditional student as well.
Okay, next question. What are some of the policy strategies that states are using to specifically target Latino and other minority students?
This is Michelle again. As I mentioned briefly in my comments, I think some of the big areas that states are looking at are financial aid reform, transfer, and remediation. And really kind of boil that down, that's because a large percentage, a vast majority of Latinos especially, start their post-secondary experience at community colleges. And so really targeting those institutions and the processes that those institutions need to support their students onto completion of not only a 2-year degree, but also efforts to support them in transferring onto 4-year degrees if that's what they would like to move on to. I think also looking at successes at Hispanic serving institutions. These are institutions that enroll at least 25% of, at least 25% of their student body is Latino. Certainly, there are many of these institutions that have been working with these students and their families for a long period of time and are honing in on practices that really support these students onto completion.
Staying on the theme of community colleges, what kinds of trends are particularly impacting community colleges?
I think that kind of goes back again to the remedial. One of the issues is remedial education that Brenda talked about. That's certainly a huge area that community colleges are facing. We are seeing many states even outright banning, maybe that's a strong word, remedial education at their 4-year institutions, and really relying on their community colleges to be able to get students through this remedial process efficiently and successfully. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Well, Michelle, let me fill in while you're thinking about that. One of the other trends that we're watching really closely in regard to community colleges has to do with the big picture around workforce development and the role that they will play in workforce development. Everywhere you talk to community college leaders and legislators as well, you understand that community colleges are much more nimble institutions. They are able to much more quickly react and respond to changing workforce needs, to training needs, to job needs, and work with employers in the community, because they're so much more community-based, to really be suppliers of new credentials, new certificates, and new degrees that will be required for emerging jobs. And so we're watching as they will indeed play a very significant role in how higher education responds to workforce development issues, particularly related to linking degrees to the jobs that are going to be taking the lead in each of the different states.
And building off of that, I think data is huge at the community college level especially. Not only data like what Julie was talking about of knowing what workforce needs are and getting that data to community colleges so that they can better adjust their practices for what the needs are for their local communities. But as well as, again, this non-traditional student idea. At the federal level, we're really only looking at full-time, first-time students. That's not the population that's on community college campuses. And so states really need to get a full picture of what their student body looks like at community colleges, again, so they can better allocate resources and determine where gaps or opportunities that need to be fulfilled for the students in these institutions.
Okay, next question. Is there a difference in graduate versus bachelor students in terms of the data mentioned on part-time and full-time students?
sorry for the long pause there. The three of us were checking with each other. My sense is that the data that certainly that we've looked at and that we highlight is undergraduate students. In terms of graduate students, Michelle and Brenda, I'm assuming that they're more full-time, many of them getting subsidies or tuition subsidies or assistantships or so forth. But that's about the best I can contribute to that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, why don't we do one or two more questions. What do you think states will be doing in 2013 regarding in-state tuition for undocumented students?
Hi, this is Brenda. I think we're going to continue to see activity on this issue. It's been a hot topic for really the last 4 legislative sessions, and I would expect that trend to continue. We know that there is a bill in Colorado that has been introduced to allow for in-state tuition for undocumented students, and we do expect that bill to pass. And we will be continually tracking the activity in the other states too, as well as soon as they introduce bills, and that information can always be found on our website, so we encourage you to check that out.
All right, great. We will end it there. Thank you to Julie, Brenda, and Michelle, and thank you all of you for listening today. There is going to be a short survey at the end that we would appreciate it if you'd fill that out. The next of our webinar series will be on February 1st, and the topic is entitled Medicaid, the Health Reform Expansion, Taming Costs, and More. Thank you so much for joining us.